Amanda from Pontes Books, here with our historical tidbit for Chapter 9 of The Prince and the Pauper. Today we are focusing on Tudor fashion. This is not a very long chapter. However, a good chunk of it is spent describing what people are wearing. And in particular, at the end, it zooms in on what Tom is wearing as his first really time being paraded out as a prince, and where he's actually starting to walk and talk like a prince. So they're really emphasizing this by his transformation, including his clothing, how far he's come in this short amount of time. So today we're focusing in on Tudor fashion. So in this picture, you can see this is actually a picture of Queen Elizabeth. So this wouldn't exactly have been the style of the time of The Prince and the Pauper because Elizabeth is still young in the story. But I like this picture, one, because it's crazy style. Two, it's Princess Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. Three, you can see on her arm, there's this little ermine looking thing, which is actually our fun fact for this week. So we'll get into that. We'll touch on it a little bit with Tudor fashion, but you'll have to wait and watch for a little bit more information in our fun fact for this chapter. All right, diving into things. So in The Prince and the Pauper, as I said, the end of the chapter gives this explanation of what Tom looks like dressed in his princely attire. So it says he, meaning Tom, was magnificently habited in a doublet of white satin with a front piece of purple cloth of tissue, powdered with diamonds and edged with ermine. Over this, he wore a mantle of white cloth of gold, pounced with the triple feathered crest, lined with blue satin, set with pearls and precious stones, and fashioned with the clasp of brilliants. About his neck hung the Order of the Garter and several princely foreign orders, and wherever light fell upon him, jewels responded with a blinding flash. So it's a lot of description. What you have to remember about this time is there wasn't like TV that people could watch. There weren't even really I don't know, obviously there weren't photographs from the time, but you didn't have readily accessible Google searches where you could look up what some of these things were. So Mark Twain had to create the picture in your mind with his descriptions. So hence the excessive description in this chapter of what people are wearing and what they look like. So what was the formal style for men at the time? Again, this is roughly the time period. It's not always perfectly aligned. So they would often wear a soft cap on top, and then an overgown, so kind of an over jacket. In the description of Tom, he's wearing a mantle. So that's kind of more like almost like a little cape that he is wearing over his outfit. But in this picture, they're wearing an overgown. Then there would be a doublet. A doublet is like a short-sleeved, kind of short, tight-fitting jacket. Breeches, so those are those kind of like loose-looking shorts that they would wear. Then stockings or hose. Hose is what they usually would describe. They're essentially like tights that they would wear. They wouldn't really wear pants, so they'd wear these breeches and hose. And then they would wear a more style of narrow shoe. Oftentimes these outfits would be made of silk. And again, this isn't just general formal style for men. This is mostly royals is who we're focusing in on. And then they would often wear frills, especially on their necks and on their wrists. So you can see in that picture, nice, stylish image there. One of the covers of an edition of The Prince and the Pauper has Edward/Tom. You don't really know which one it is because Tom and Edward are both on the cover, wearing an outfit that looks very similar to this. All right, what about for women? Now, we don't really get a lot of description of women dress in this chapter. It does come up throughout the book, so I still wanted to focus on it as well, just because it's fun. So they would often wear no cap. Caps were not in style for women at this time, but they would also often have their hair decorated with ribbons and feathers. So they would still have a fancy hairstyle, just no hat. Oftentimes there would be an open ruff. So that's what that like stiff, starchy collar is that you would see around their neck. So Queen Elizabeth had one in that initial picture that I showed that went all the way around her neck, but more often it was open at this time to kind of frame their face. There would be a low neckline, wide sleeves, A long bodice, so that's kind of like the torso part of your dress, also pointed and stiff. So the outer dress was stiff, but also they would be wearing a corset under it. That would make their midsection very skinny and probably rock hard. We'll get to the corset in a second. They would have a wide skirt, and you'll see that it kind of like flares out in this kind of flattened thing. Again, we'll get to that in a second. They often would wear lace as well. And then lastly, underneath their outfit, and there's more as well, but one of the other details they often wore was this farthingale corset, drum farthingale corset, which you can see in that picture on the bottom. So it basically laces up so that they can, pull their insides nice and tight, make their waist nice and small. But then it also had this firm disc that would stick out, and the wide skirt would sit on top of that, giving these illusions of just gigantic hips, Obviously, no one thought that was their actual silhouette, but that was the style, to have that really skinny waist and the really wide hips. So some other notable clothing items that might have been worn at this time. So as we mentioned, the soft cap for men, but sometimes they would be decorated with badges or ribbons or feathers. Oftentimes we see them with feathers. They would also have slashed sleeves on their doublets that would usually reveal another fabric underneath. So it kind of had this double fabric look. And also a cod piece. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but it's basically a, garment that would be worn over the private parts. That was apparently made famous, was really something Henry VIII was a big fan of. Then for women, they would wear petticoats, a parlet, which is worn over a corset, a kirtle, which is an underskirt, a bum roll, which is padding around the hips. So all of that would be kind of just things that would be worn, under what you would see. So women had a lot of layers. They would often wear leather shoes or boots for outside, and sometimes silk or velvet slip-on shoes for indoor use. They also had that same kind of effect on their sleeves, where that would be folded in a certain way that you would see kind of another fabric underneath. So at the time, it was also interesting. This didn't start in Tudor times, but it did continue, and Henry VIII added a little bit more onto it. They had what were called these sumptuary laws. And so sumptuary derives from the Latin term for expenditure. So it had to do with basically like items that people would purchase and who was allowed to purchase / wear / own these certain types of items. So it was something that started during the reign of Edward III in the 14th century. So like I said, they can apply to lots of different things: food, drink, furniture, jewelry, clothes. But in this case, we're focusing in on some of the rules that had to do with clothing, since we're focusing on fashion. So you can see that some examples here. So like only royals could wear the color purple. So you see that there was purple mentioned at the beginning, the excerpt from the chapter. Cloth of gold was also mentioned. That was something that only royals could wear. And then that ermine, again, we'll get to that. That's a type of fur that's going to be in our fun fact. And penalty for breaking these fines could be fines, loss of property, or even loss of your title or your life. So there were lots of other rules, and they went down all the different layers. Like it was like only royals can wear this. Only people who have this title can wear this. Only people who make this much money can wear this. So it was very specific about, especially people who were kind of in the noble ranks, what they could and could not wear, to not kind of step on anyone's toes who had a higher title than them. There weren't really a lot of restrictions for people who were more poor at the time, but they kind of just figured they weren't going to be buying these expensive things anyway, so they didn't feel the need to specifically mention them in the rules. So I thought that was really interesting. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.